Hello, viewers of The Pioneer. How are you doing? I hope you're healthy and well. As the Pioneer team, we are here once again to bring you the latest developments on the Russia-Ukraine war. We will soon discuss the latest developments on the front line. The furious struggle continues unabated. According to the latest reports, the situation on the Donetsk front line is quite tight. We can almost talk about a fault line situation ready to break. There is a fault line ready to break. It is just not clear when it's able to break. We have mentioned it many times in our previous reports. The clashes at this point are very critical for the Russian armed forces. The Russian armed forces launched a major attack on the Donetsk front line with great expectations. None of these expectations have been met so far, because the strategy of the Russian army was quite wrong. This was often stated by the military experts and the Russian sources, but the Russian war leadership did not care about this. So what is the latest situation on the front line? Let's take a look at the developments together. As the Pioneer team, we continue to bring you developments regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. You can also support me and my hardworking team by using the super thanks button below the video. Let's start if you are ready, the Pioneer reports. Let's start with the latest developments on the Zaporizhia front line. There was no significant developments on the Kherson front line today. Therefore, we will not discuss the latest situation on this region. We will start with the latest developments in the Robotin sector of the Zaporizhia front line. According to reports, the situation here is similar to the past days. According to reports, units of the Russian armed forces continued to carry out attacks on the western part of the town of Robotin on the Zaporizhia front line. The situation in Robotin is similar to the past days. The Russian armed forces did not achieve any gains in their offensive today. The defense units of the Ukrainian armed forces in this region have a very successful profile. So far, Russian troops have not made any new gains in this region. Ukrainian armed forces troops were calmer compared to the past days. Ukrainian troops did not carry out much offensive activities in the region today. They were more interested in repelling Russian troops. In Robotin sector of the Zaporizhia front line, the demarcation line remains largely stable. Let's continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Roboty, Onrykhiv, Malaya Tokmakcha, and Novodanilivka. In turn, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted positions of the Russian armed forces in the direction of Novoprokopovka, Novoprokopivka, Verbov, and Ichenkov. Now let's continue by analyzing the latest developments in the Vuhledar sector of the Zaporizhia front line. According to the latest reports, following the shelling, units of the Russian armed forces launched an attack on the Stromyorsk. As you know, there was an intense pressure on the Ukrainian armed forces in this area. The Russian army is now trying to increase this pressure. The Stromyorsk and Yorkhain are very important. The Russian army has lost great prestige here. In order to receive and recover this loss of the prestige, the Russian armed forces are trying to recapture these two regions. However, they have not achieved any results so far. There are also attacks by units of the Russian armed forces on Perchistovka. There are no new gains by the Russian armed forces in these regions either. The Ukrainian armed forces have been inflicting heavy losses on the Russian army with their successful defense operations. Let us also mention the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Vuhledar. Russian artillery was quite calm today. Artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted positions of the Russian armed forces in Priyotny, Zavetny Novomyrovsk, and Pavlovka. Now let's continue with the Donetsk front line. According to the latest reports, units of the Russian armed forces, supported by long-range weapons, carried out offensive operations southwest of Novomikhailivka and on the outskirts of the town of Krasnohorivka. These offensive operations, though fierce, were not successful. Ukrainian armed forces units continue to hold their positions here. We also see Russian troops carrying out offensive operations in Novolsky. Russian troops also attacked Perpomskoye after the shelling. There are no new gains of the Russian armed forces in these regions. It is also reported that the Russian losses in this region are higher than in other regions. Similarly, Russian troops are attempting to advance to Severnoye. Following artillery and airstrikes, the city itself was attacked by the Russian troops from the northeast. There are no border changes in these areas yet. We also observed that the Russian troops with artillery support are carrying out offensive actions near Novobakhmutovka, which is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. So far, no border changes have been reported in this area either. Let us continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted units of the Ukrainian armed forces in Pobeda, Gorogorivka, Stepny, and Orchetina. In turn, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted positions of the Russian armed forces in Donetsk and the village of Krasnohorivka. Let's continue by looking at the latest situation on the Bakhmut front line. According to the latest reports, units of the Russian armed forces have again launched attacks on Klishchivka. In particular, the elevations northwest of the Klishchivka were targeted by the Russian armed forces. Andreevka was also targeted by Russian troops. However, the borderline is largely stable. The Ukrainian army has so far managed to repel all the attacks by the Russian troops. Let us continue by mentioning the artillery activity in the region. According to the reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Ukrainian troops stations in Andreevka, Ivonivsky, Bogdanivka, and Seversk. On the other hand, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted Russian armed forces units stations in Bakhmut and Yahidny. Let's also look at the Luhansk front line. We have mentioned it in our previous reports. There are quite furious counter-conflicts in this region. Here, we do not encounter many developments that would change the dominance of the area. Especially the Sinkivka region is critical here. Forested areas in this region are the scene of intense clashes. As we mentioned, there is no border change in this region. According to local sources, geographical and climate conditions in the region caused great problems for the Russian army. Now tell me, what do you think? Do you think the Ukrainian armed forces will again attack on the Zaporizhzhia front line? How will the deadlocked fighting on the Donetsk front line take shape? What is the reason for the inability of the Russian army to advance on the Donetsk front line? Do you think the situation will change on the Bakhmut front line? And how will the losses of the Russian army shape the situation in the region? Let me know in the comments. I read and care about all your comments.